Bettco presents the Sales Professional Program featuring Joe McGuire. Tape number 2, The Professional Attitude.
Ladies and gentlemen, Joe McGuire with Bettco, car salesman, manager, dealer advisor, anything you want to talk about the automobile business. I guess I've been good and bad at it for many, many years. And I love a chance always to talk to the salespeople of the United States because the automobile business depends upon you and I doing our job every day. Now you can talk about parts and service, you can talk about management, but if the salesman doesn't get that car on the road at a profit, nothing else moves. Now it's so important that you and I as salesmen like what we do. I've seen a lot of people in the car business who don't like what they do. How the heck can you be good at something you don't like what you do? Now to me, the car business is better than to have a license to steal. Where else could you go into a business with no background necessary, no training necessary, no educational background necessary, just strictly have the right attitude, you can make a lot of money. Now, people say, well, you need more than that. What do you need? Well, you have to believe in yourself and your ability to do the job. People ask me all the time, they say, Joe, what's the most important thing that a good car salesman has to have? That's simple, attitude. Now you say, here we go again with that same old attitude jazz, man. I'm sick of hearing about that. Well, you shouldn't be, because attitude's where it's at. You are what you think you are. You're the sum total of your own thoughts. If you think you can win, you're going to win. If you think lose, you're going to lose. You know, the greatest line I ever heard in my life about attitude was, I remember a couple years ago during a World Series when Ted Williams, the great ball player, was being interviewed by Joe Garagiola. And he said to him, Williams, you're such an expert on hitting. You have such a terrific attitude about hitting. You know, you shaved and balanced the bats. You had your uniform specially designed for wind resistance. You had your wife take slow motion pictures of all the opposing pitchers. Did all this kind of stuff. All this expertise. With all that, Williams, how come you never batted 1,000? Williams only thought a second. Then he said, you know something? That always amazed me. In other words, what did he think was going to happen? Every time I get up there, he was going to get a base hit. That's why he got so many hits. Now, I've worked in dealerships all over the country. I worked in one dealership for many, many years myself. I've worked in dealerships, I sold at least one car in every 49 of the 50 states I've sold a car. Now, that's amazing, isn't it? I've worked in England. I've worked all over Canada. I've worked in Mexico. I've worked at 14 weeks in Australia. Now, selling cars in all these different countries and all these different cities, all these different states, tell me what's different. Nothing's different. It's exactly the same, because everybody comes from the same factory. One each head, two each eyes, two each ears, etc. The same factory puts everybody out. But the same things I said in Australia were the same as they did in the United States. There were a couple of times when it was a little interesting. The first time I went to England, I was very much concerned about what would happen. I'd never been to England before, never been outside the continental United States at that time. This was several years ago. And I'm working in this dealership in a place called Park Lane in London. And the very first up, I'm going to take the first up. We have a little tape recorder in my pocket to show the salesman how we take an up in America. Now, the salesmen were just like salesmen anywhere. We're sitting around talking, and with these young guys with their beautiful British accents, you know, and in comes an up. And one of the salesmen says, here comes another turd. I said, what's with the turd here, man? We're looking at the floor. Well, that's their word for flake, stroker, roller, banana, coconut, like you and I have in this country, right? Well, I was learning other phraseology that they use. For example, when a guy's an easy mark, like we would call a lay down, they call him a punter. When a guy is a real tough guy, they call him a wanker. You know, now I'd never heard any of this terminology before, right? So at the end of the week, they had a big conclave in a place called Cambridge, and they had about 200 or 300 salespeople from all over London, the London area, came to this conclave, and we were going to use the tapes I made on closing. And it was a seminar on closing. Well, not knowing British terminology, I learned all the terminology, like using the word like a turd and like punter and like wanker, and using things like windscreen instead of windshield, and boot instead of trunk, and bonnet instead of hood, and all that sort of stuff, and pounds instead of dollars. Well, I just got used to using all that terminology. Well, in front of all these salesmen, about 200, 250 of them, about half of them were women, because a tremendous number of women sell cars in England right now. So I start using my new terminology. When I said turd, nobody batted an eye. When I said punter, nobody batted an eye. When I said wanker, man, everybody got embarrassed. You know, all the men looked embarrassed, the women looked embarrassed. I was to find out later that that's a term I should have examined before I used it. It has to do with somebody enjoying himself by himself. You know, so I decided, as you know, we have a similar term in an American dealership. Well, going back to the guy on the floor, when the guy first walked on the floor, the guy they called it, so I walked over to him. I was a little nervous. You know, I don't get nervous anymore. I get excited, but I don't get nervous. I was a little nervous. I walked across the floor, and this guy, I thought they set me up. Here he was. He had on a black bowler hat. He was wearing a cravat-type tie. He was wearing a yellow striped vest. He was wearing a black jacket, sort of a black jacket, gray striped pants. He was carrying an umbrella. Looked like Arthur Treacher fell off a fish package. You know? So I said to myself, they set me up with this guy. Now I was to find out later that that's the way most of the businessmen dress in that part of London. That's like the gray flannel suit routine. Well, when I woke up to this guy, as I walked across the floor, as I said, I was a little nervous because, you know, I heard about the staid, conservative British, and they're not two of my long suits, you know. Also, with a name like Joseph Patrick McGuire, I was afraid somebody's going to stick a bomb in my ear, right? So I walked over to the guy. I didn't have to worry. And I said, "Good morning, sir." He said, I said, "Welcome to," and he said, hold it. With a beautiful British accent, he said, "Hold it. I don't want any bullshit." Just like that. He said, "I know your car's worth. I know what my car's worth. I want your very best price." I laughed. And he said, "I said something funny?" I said, "No, sir. It's my first day in England, but I met you 4,000 times before." You know, because, come on, what's different, man? Haven't you heard that same guy coming in your dealership all over this country? Now, people tell me, they say, "Joe, well, you say it's all the same, but it's different in my part of the world." Baloney. I've been in all parts of the world, right? When I'm up in a place like Portland, Oregon, guys will say, "Well, Joe, these web feet are different up here," right? I'm in Grand Rapids, Michigan. They say, "Joe, these Dutchmen are different here." I'm up in Maine. These up-homers are different, right? I'm in Chicago, New York, or any other big city. These mid-city people are different. Come on, they're all exactly the same. I haven't found any difference in Fargo, North Dakota to the middle of Manhattan. The customer comes to the same factory. As I say, one each head, two each eyes, two each ears. Now, the name of this game is to find out where the customer's coming from, right? Find out what it's going to take to put that rump in the seat at a profit. Now, you got to believe. You got to believe certain things. First of all, you got to believe in yourself. Now, where does confidence come from? Confidence comes from knowledge. Knowledge breeds confidence. Confidence breeds enthusiasm. Enthusiasm sells things. Now, when you know how to do something, or when you know what you don't know, it's strength. Now, take, for example, product knowledge. I think product knowledge is very important, but for reasons other than people think. Not for the customer's benefit. For whose benefit should you become a product knowledge expert? For your own. What does it build in you to know the product? Confidence, right? So you'll be out there and you're not afraid of being embarrassed. What is the only reason people are afraid to ask for the order? Nobody's afraid to say to another human being, "Come on, sir, why don't you buy the car?" Nobody's afraid to say that. But the fear comes in the response. When I say, "Why don't you buy the car?" and the customer goes, "Blah!" If nobody ever told me how to handle that, I'll fold like a cheap tent. If nobody told me how to handle it. So it's not the fear of asking for the order, it's the fear of knowing what to do when the guy answers in some wild way. So it's knowledge, isn't it? Now let's take this product knowledge. Well, I worked in one dealership for many, many years. I knew the product extremely well. Now, I'm liable to work in 8 or 9 different product lines in the course of 6 weeks. Like the past 2 or 3 months, I probably worked in selling any kind of car you can sell in the United States. So I'd have to take off 6 months a year to understand the product. So I don't know the product like I once did. But I know what I don't know. And I know how to handle objections. So I walk in, say I'm handling, recently I was working in a dealership. It was a 911 Porsche, a 911 Porsche. And the guy says to me, "How does the sword fit the flungen on the Knuten valve there?" Whatever the hell. I don't know what he's talking about, right? So when I'm wrong, man, I'm wrong strong. So I didn't know what he's talking about, so I just said to him, "Interesting point, sir. Why do you say that?" And he said, "Well, so." I said, "No, shit." And what do you know? He starts telling me all about the product, right? I threw in a couple of smiles, a couple of no shits, and guess what happens? He tells me all I want to know about him and about the product. Now, you say, "Well, Joe, that won't work." Yes, it will. Say to the customer, "What's that?" "Sir, let me ask you a question. If we worked it out to your satisfaction, you'd probably take the car home for that reason tonight, wouldn't you?" I said, "Well, no." "Well, what is it going to take to sell you this car tonight?" "I'm much more concerned with so-and-so." "Well, when you saw this car, would give you that so-and-so to the degree you're looking for, you'd certainly consider that, wouldn't you, sir?" Now, what's happened to this objection? It's just melted, hasn't it? Because I'm working the guy and letting him tell me what he has to have. Now, suppose he says, "I want to know about that." And I said, "Terrific, sir. We worked it out to your satisfaction. That would be a reason for taking this car home, wouldn't it?" He says, "Well, it might be." "Well, let's go find out." Then I would take him to the service department and find out exactly what he wanted to know. Don't ever tell a guy something. Don't ever lie to him. You know, one thing I found out in all the years, I've been a salesman now for, 36 years. In all those years, I've never found it necessary to do anything dishonest or immoral to sell a car. Let me say that again. In all those years of selling cars, I've never found it necessary to do anything dishonest or immoral to sell a car. Now, when somebody does any of that kind of stuff, That's just because he doesn't want to do it straight. You don't have to do anything that isn't 100% moral to sell automobiles. But you have to be moral to yourself. When a customer walks in a dealership and says, I'm not going to buy a car today. Now, your attitude has to tell you, he doesn't mean that. You know, we take something that nobody in this world would take. Nobody in this world would take what a car salesman takes. Try an experiment for me. Go to your local barbershop where they don't know you, a local barbershop. Stand in the middle of the barbershop. And the barber says, can we help you? No. What do you mean, no? I'm just looking around. What do you mean you're looking? I'm shopping barbers. They throw you on your head, right or wrong. Go to your local dentist, their doctor. Just go into the doctor's office, right? Look around at the walls. The nurse says, can we help you? No. What do you mean, no? Don't bother me, I'm looking. What would they do, man? And she says, what do you mean you're looking? I'm shopping dentists. They'll throw you the hell out. Nobody would take what we take from a customer. Now, I'm as concerned about the customer as you are. But I'll tell you one thing. Most customers object to the fact that we don't treat them like customers. Recently, 200,000 people were asked the question, within the last year, what annoys you the most about a car salesman? Now, listen to that question. It's a loaded question because it presupposes that there's something wrong with the car salesman. When it says, what annoys you the most about a car salesman? Now, what would you expect the answers to that question to be from 200,000 people? Stuff like a little on the sneaky side, you know, a little dishonest, a little immoral, all these things, these fictions about car salesmen. There was a time, of course, when that sort of thing happened in the automobile business. That's 25 years ago. How long are you going to last in the car business today if you don't do it straight and moral and honest? And certainly there are crooked salesmen and crooked dealerships, like there are crooked doctors, lawyers, Indian chiefs, ministers, priests, as we found out here recently, right? Anybody can be subject to bad people. But basically speaking, you cannot operate in the car business today unless you operate with morality and honesty. Now, when somebody walks in that dealership and he says, I'm not going to buy a car today, he doesn't mean that. He flat doesn't mean it. What is he saying? He's nervous. You do the same thing. You do the same thing. You know, if you go into some place, people say, well, car salesmen will say, all customers lie. You shouldn't say that. All car customers lie. All customers lie. Come on, man. When you and I are customers, we lie. I don't care how straight you think you are. I want that person that's watching this program that has never told a lie to raise his hand. And if one hand goes up, I suspect you just told at least your second. Come on, it's impossible in our society not to lie to people. It's just flat impossible. I mean, your best friend calls you up and says, Joe, now ladies, I'm not trying to be chauvinistic here. You can tell the story either way. But your best friend calls you up and he says, Joe, he says, I just got married. The most beautiful girl in the world. She's gorgeous. She's absolutely beautiful. She's a movie star. Hey, man, bring her over. I'd love to meet her. I'm looking out the front window of my house. In my driveway pulls my best friend's car. Out of the passenger side gets some kind of a disaster. What the hell is that, man? So they say, wow. He brings her into the living room. Here she is, Joe, my new wife, Elizabeth. Gorgeous, isn't she? You're at the crossroads, friends. One small bark and you're dead forever, right? You get killed and you lost a friend. So you say, she's lovely. What are you lying for? She ain't lovely. You say, well, that's not a lie. That's social artifice. Baloney, man. You said something you didn't believe, therefore it's a lie. But if you're a salesman, you didn't have to lie, did you? You could have just looked at her and said, wow. And what does that mean? That could be, wow, goodness. But you just say, wow. And the person reads in what they want to read into it. So, isn't my baby beautiful? How about that? What did you say? You didn't say anything, but people read into what they want to read into it. That's what salesmanship is all about, right? Getting the point across without lying to anybody. Now, the menu is the greatest example in the world. A greatest example in the world of lies. Now you say, well, no, come on, man. If the menu told the truth, they'd never sell anything. You go into a fancy restaurant. It says on the menu, sizzling steak au jus. Now, that's a lie. That's a couple of lies. First of all, you show me any part of the cow's anatomy that's really called the steak. There isn't any. That's a Madison Avenue selling word, isn't it? And let's take the second part of that, sizzling. You're sitting way the hell over there, and the kitchen's way the hell over there. There's no way in hell that steak can sizzle from thither to thither. It ain't going to happen. Now, what happens? You know, they have some of my sons were waiters in their college days. They're waiters in the summertime, and they showed me something about sizzling steak. Notice the sizzling steak is always served in a wooden or a plastic outside serving platter with a red-hot metal insert. Now, why is the insert red-hot? They don't cook the steak on it. That's to help the sizzle. What the waiter will do, he'll take a handful of cold water and throw it on that platter. Now, that sizzle is what you hear. You say, why, those liars. I want the truth. No, you don't. No, you don't. Because you go to the fancy restaurant, and the menu it says, dead cow broiled in blood. That's what it would say, right? How much of that they're going to sell? It's so much better to say sizzling steak, au juice. Or you go in that same place for fancy breakfast in the morning. Fancy breakfast. Instead of ham and eggs in the menu, it tells the brutal truth. It says dead pig and unborn chickens. The waitress comes up and says, how'd you like your embryos cooked this morning? Now, how do you like that, man? You wouldn't sell any of that, would you? And all I'm saying to you is, well, we're selling an automobile. You got to sell that car like sizzling steak, not like dead cow. Now, all of you watching this, whether you're a brand new salesman, been around for 25 or 30 years, we all can learn something every day, can't we? I have, and it's what I'm doing these last few years, every day I learn something sometimes from the newest person on the floor. When you all agree with me, you veterans out there, that the newest person on the floor could teach you and me something if we're willing to listen. But you got to be willing to listen. There's always a better way to do something. Now, when that customer walks to the front door, the first thing you and I have to believe is that he's a buyer. Here's where this attitude comes in, right? Now, when he says, I'm just looking, that's a con job, isn't it? He's defending himself. He's defending himself. Now, you say, well, I wouldn't do it. The heck you don't. Let's suppose we're all going out tonight, women or men, to buy a suit of clothes. You go to your favorite place, you bought clothes there before, you have the money in your pocket, you're in here to buy a suit of clothes. You're over looking at the clothes, looking for your size. A salesman walks over and says, can I help you? Now, come on, you're here to buy a suit of clothes. Well, what do you and I tell this guy every single time? Well, no, I'm just looking. Don't we tell him that? How come you're lying? You're here to buy a suit. Now, when that same person comes into the dealership tonight to buy a car, that clerk that waited on you, and you say, and they say, I'm just looking, why do we believe him? You weren't telling the truth and you said you were just looking. You were in there to buy a suit. Now think back for a moment. When you go to a real good clothing store, not a schlock place, but a real good clothing store, when you say to that good salesman, I'm just looking, what hits you next, man? Before you know it hit it, off comes one coat, on comes another coat, you're standing in front of the mirror. And it says $450 on the sleeve of that jacket. And you say, well, it's not exactly my style. Me buy about $300, it's not your style, right? But he's got you, what has he got you in immediately? You're in a demonstration ride, man. He's got you in the product right away, hasn't he? And you're going to buy something. You ask the real good clothing salesman what his percentages are. He'll tell you. When he can get somebody to try the clothes on, he'll close 90% of them. When he can't get them to try the clothes on, he's lucky to close 10% of them. It's his demonstration ride. So what he believes everybody walking in is a buyer. Now when you go to stores, for example, the difference between a retail clerk and a salesman, very simple. Guy walks into a store and he says, I want to see a hammer. Now the retail clerk says they're over there. The salesman says, let me ask you a question, sir. We pick a hammer you like at a price you can't refuse. I bet you take it home tonight, right? Now, which of the two's got the best chance of selling something? You got to try to sell something that just didn't say, come on, fish, jump into the boat. Now, you say, well, I'm afraid I'm going to offend someone. If you don't push people, who are you going to offend? You're going to offend yourself because you're not going to make any money. You're going to offend your creditors. Now, pushing people sounds like a terrible word. Well, let's get a couple of words out into the open here. If you're truly a salesman, I don't claim to be fancy. I claim to be a salesman. I'm a peddler. In a professional way, how to get a rump and a seat at a profit. That's the name of this game. That's what I come to work to do every day. Not to gripe and complain, but to put a rump and a seat at a profit and make a ton of money. The only limit on how much money you can make is the limit you put on yourself. And you know that about the car business, don't you? Now, when a guy walks in and he says, I'm not going to buy a car, you've got to hear that the right way. Convince me I should buy a car today. Now, when somebody says, look, I'm just looking around, you got to know how to handle that, right? Well, sir, let's look together. What did you have in mind? Aren't there a million ways to handle it? You walk up to a guy and say, good morning, sir, welcome to. He says, I don't want to hear your bullshit. What do you want for that car right there? Now, this is a common customer, isn't it? You don't find him in the books on sales, but isn't that a guy you're going to find every day of your life? See, one of the things I've always had an argument with the factories. I've always had an argument with the factories and saying, you know, why don't you run some realistic films? You've seen factory films, right? Where the film says, you say this, and he says that, and you say this, and he says that, you say this, he says that, down goes a duck, and you win $100. Or that unbelievable, they even role play it. A guy well-dressed, got about $1,000 worth of clothes on, never makes a mistake, never has his hair out of place, never even has to go to the bathroom, this guy, right? He walks up to the customer and says, good morning, sir, welcome to ABC Motors, my name is Joe McGuire, may I have yours? And the customer, that's fine. Then the customer says, good morning, Mr. McGuire. My name is Harry Jones. I live at 1542 Blindbrook Lane. My telephone number is CA66911. I want to buy that truck right over there. Man, I haven't met that mother in 35 years. How about you? Now, what happens, you see, when you teach a young man to do that, or an older guy, and he goes up to the customer, says, good morning, sir. And the customer, never mind that. What do you want for that truck? Now, if he's going to be flumming through the book, what do you do about that? What do you do about that? If he's learned the procedure of handling a customer, the rest is a snap, isn't it? The procedure of handling a customer. The guy says, I want your best price. Here's where most guys fall on their face here. Guy's looking right at the Monroney label, let's say, right? Looking right at the label. And he says, I want your best price. Have you ever had the feeling to say to the guy, come on, dummy, can't you read? But you can't say that, right? A very one that never said it. Guy's looking at the label and says, what's the price of that car? A lot of times, those that work with me on the floor know that I like to have fun with the customer. Where the customer says, what's the price of this vehicle? Suppose, say, the sticker said $14,500. Sometimes I'll hit him $700 high. I'll just say, $15,200, sir, and I'll bet you buy for that low price alone. Now he can read real good. He's, wait a minute, that sticker says $14,500. Yes, sir, it certainly does. Notice here where it says manufacturer retail price? That's where we have that for your protection ours. The federal government says we must do that. But my boss happens to think this was worth $700 more than that. Come on, I said, let's sell you the car. What's the guy say? Bullshit, man, I'm not going to pay you over sticker. Now look where we are now. I mean, the guy's defending paying sticker, isn't he? Now you tell me I'm talking some classroom baloney here. This is what happens with the words. You've got to take charge of things, right? If the guy pushes you, you're going to keep backing up. Now if somebody hits you, you got to hit him back. I'm in the kind of neighborhood you were raised in, but where I was raised, if somebody hits you, if you didn't hit him back, next day the whole neighborhood would kick shit out of you, right? See, now one of the things is when you've got to get used to some words like greedy, ruthless, you know, pushy. Now let's take the word ruthless. Because that's a terrible word. No, it isn't. That's a fine English word. Now, ruthless, I'm not a student of the Bible, but ruthless comes from the Bible. Ruth's relentless pursuit of her mother-in-law, Naomi. That's where the word comes from, right? Hence, ruthless. All it really means is relentless. Now, anybody that's good at what they do is relentless, right or wrong. They relentlessly pursue what they have to do to win. Now, this baloney you hear all your life about, it's not whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game. That's the biggest crock I ever heard in my entire life. Certainly it matters how you play the game, but you must win or lose. And if you're not concerned with winning and losing, like Vince Lombardi's great line, if it doesn't matter whether you win or lose, how come we keep score? See, it does matter whether you win. Certainly how you play the game, but you got to be in there to win. Somebody said to one of my sons, who's also in the car business, is your father always that intense? He said, I've known him for 24 years. He's always been that intense. He said, he never lets you win anything. If you play with him, he plays to win. He said, if you play penny ante poker, he plays like he's playing for $1 million. If he gets in the game, he gets in the game. If you kick your ass, he doesn't get in the game. Now, come on, man, isn't that what you come to work for every day, right? To put somebody in a car, but to do it honestly and morally and make the customer enjoy it. Remember, you can tell a guy to go to hell, but you got to make him look forward to the trip. Now, when you're selling a car, you're selling something that should be fun and exciting to the customer. If the customer's not having fun, then he's not going to buy the car. If he does, he's not going to buy it for enough money, from my point of view. Now, let's get back to a minute when the guy says, what's the price of the vehicle? Salesman says, here's what normally happens. Now, come on. And nobody makes a mistake on purpose. If you're doing it wrong, it's because nobody ever showed you how to do it right. Nobody makes a mistake on purpose. But here's what unfortunately happens most of the time. Because what's the price of that car? This kind of thing. Well, sir, we're asking $12,500. Come on. Or, well, sir, the sticker price is $12,500. Listen to this. We're asking $12,500. Now, what does that sound like to the customer? We have no hope of getting this, sir, but here's what we're asking. You know, that's ridiculous. That's a negative implication. Or the sticker price is, aren't you almost asking a guy to say, what's the non-sticker price, correct? You're letting the guy tell you how to run your business. The inmates are running the asylum. Now, if you try to hit my hand, you took a punch at my hand, you come at me, boom, like that, right? If I said, move backward and try to punch my hand, you'd punch it fall about here, wouldn't it? Because you got to be forward. When you're trying to hit something, you got to come at it. Now, with a big smile on your face, the key to being aggressive without being belligerent is a smile. People say, Joe, you push people so hard, and you never aggravate them. Why? Because I smile at them all the time. You know, a line with which I'm so well connected. The line, why do you say that? Even articles I've written about me called, why do you say that? Now, that's a great line because it gets everybody off balance. When you agree, you could say it to anybody in the world. Come on now, folks, why do you say that? And nobody could get mad at that. But take the smile out of it. Why do you say that? Up your butt, and the battle's on, right? Because, see, you said something that was offensive to somebody. It wasn't friendly. The guy says, I'm not going to buy a car today. Now try something for me, right? The guy says, I'm not going to buy a car today. Look him right in the eye and say, yes, you are. And the guy says, Yeah, no, I'm not. Yes, you are. I said it first. Now, let me ask you something. If the guy smiles, when the guy smiles and says, I'm not going to buy a car today, he's smiling. What the heck's he doing here, right? If he's in our place, he came to buy a car. I'm not going to buy a car. Yes, you are. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. I said it first. I'm not buying a car. Let me ask you a question, sir. If you saw a car you liked at a price you can't refuse, I got to believe you'd take it home tonight. No, I wouldn't. Now, come on, sir. If one thing to make you buy a car today, short of giving it to you, what would it be? See, with that kind of approach to a person, with a smile and a friendliness, you were going to make this guy come to you. Now, a lot of these things I've talked about are a matter of learning some basic ways to go about it. There are so many simple things to learn in the car business. We overcomplicate it. It's a very simple thing. It's so simple, it's complicated. Now, what we're going to try to do in these next few tapes here is take a look at each one of the ways we're going to go about putting this together. First of all, how to properly qualify that customer. Find out what his wants and needs are. How to determine what it's going to take to put this man in a seat. But now the number one thing you have to convince yourself of, if he came into the dealership, he's a buyer. And if I'm good enough, what should my closing average be against people who voluntarily come to me? 100%. You say, well, that's not realistic. The hell you say. What's the closing average in a barbershop? When somebody comes to you, man, you should be able to put them away. Now, when I say put them away, I mean close that deal, deliver that car, and get the highest possible gross profit. Now, anytime you have feelings about high gross profit, don't worry about it. You read Forbes magazine or read the business magazines, most corporations are looking to get, like Sears and Roebuck, 35 to 36% gross profit. Hell, if our corporations could get 10 to 12%, we'd have a party, wouldn't we? Now, if you let somebody out of there without a high gross profit, you did something that's immoral to you and to the dealership. Now, when we say, what even the government says on a Monroe label, suggested retail price, that means we can get for it whatever we want to get for it. All I want you to realize, as a salesperson, whether you've been at it a long time, whether you're brand new, you're capable of selling 30 cars a month in Podunk, Iowa, if that's where you work. If you believe you're capable of that, then you're capable of it. If you are able to master the two halves of the car business, one is to become the best closer you can become, the other to become the best prospector that you can become, right? When you have those two things going for you, there's no way you can fail to be a top-flight salesman. Now, to me, first of all, you got to commit yourself to the job. Why? The car business is a tremendous contradiction, isn't it? For example, if I can name, you can too, probably I'm talking to hundreds of you out there right now. Your first year in the car business, made $40,000, $50,000, right? Many of you. Now, I know dealerships. One dealership in particular I work in, this year had 5 guys, made over $100,000 selling cars, no fleet, no big deals, strictly one at a time. Now, why? Because they mastered the two halves of the job. One to become the best closer, other to become the best prospector. But before that, they mastered themselves. What's the first sale you have to make every day of your life? Got to sell yourself on the small hurts of life, right? Got to sell yourself on, when I come to work today, I'm going to sell a car. And if I come to work with a couple of possibilities, if I have a couple of appointments, I got a better chance, don't I? If I have a couple of people who come to work every day, then I know if I get enough, it's going to be frosting on the cake. But you see, so much is up to you. You say, well, I work in a crummy place. If the doors are open and you sell cars, there's no such thing as a crummy place. You know, guys who in the same dealership, right, started at the same time. One guy made $50,000 his first year, the other guy made $28,000. They had exactly the same shop, the same product, the same people. What's the difference? You can see in one town, one dealership selling 300 cars a month, the same product, another guy selling 100. The difference is the attitude of the dealership. Now, we can do all we want. You can become the finest knowledge man in the business. You can know the product better than anybody. But the one thing you better learn is that the more you believe in yourself, the better chance you have selling a product. Now, knowledge breeds confidence, confidence breeds enthusiasm, enthusiasm sells things. What we're going to do here, we're going to work on giving you the knowledge that will help you develop the confidence to be enthusiastic as you have to be. Now, one thing, in the very beginning of all this, I'd like to state unequivocally, don't try to be Joe McGuire. If I tried to be you or you tried to be me, I'd be a flop trying to be you. If I took the most successful salesman I know, his name is Barry Poles. He's a different kind of a guy. If I try to be him, he'll make probably $200,000 this year. If I tried to be him, I'd be a flop. If he tried to be me, he'd be a flop. But I've learned from him and he's learned from me. See, if God made a good you and a good me. If I take one of your ideas, as long as I put in the framework of Joe McGuire's personality, can't get as much mileage out of it as you do. But if I try to be you, I'm just going to be a flop trying to be you, a poor imitation. God made a darn good you, man, and you can do anything you really want to do. But you have to want to do it. All the training in the world is not going to help unless you want to do it. If you're hungry, you want to make money, and you're willing to do what it takes, the car business is for you. If you're not willing to pay the price, then the car business is not for you. Car business isn't for everybody. But if you're willing to work, and you're willing to do what it takes, make the commitment to the time, anybody listening to me can be a top salesman if you really want to be. And we're going to work on how you go about doing that.